Hi, everybody. How are you doing? And welcome to Comms Search and Selections Comms Coffee Club Live, the top communications interview prep and tips. I think we've still got a few viewers joining, but there's a fair few of you here already. So I will load up the presentation that I've got prepared for you all, and then we can get cracking from there. So without further ado, let's get started. So welcome once again to anyone who's literally just joined. And this is the top communications interview prep and tips from Comms Search and Selections Comms Coffee Club. So I'm Max Forsyth. I'm the managing director and founder of Comms Search and Selection. So we're a UK-based specialist in-house communications search and recruitment firm that covers the UK and US markets. We recruit from manager to C-suite level positions across corporate comms, PR, internal, change comms, investor relations, content and thought leadership, and we cover permanent contract and interim hires. And what will we cover today? So as per all the marketing posts that you've seen previously, first we'll be going through some interview prep advice, then we'll be going through some actual interviewing tips. Then we'll go through the skills and experience and insights, and then we will finish with a Q&A. You should be able to submit your questions into the chat or into the comments box on LinkedIn, and these should pop up on my feed. So feel free to pop your questions and comments in as we go along. And I look forward to answering those at the end. So without further ado, let's get cracking. So prep advice and staying ahead of the competition. I'm conscious that in the current market environment we're in, there are a lot of candidates looking for roles at the moment, and the competition for places is fierce. And you really do need to prepare hard. And there was an old saying that my rowing coach at school used to say, which is 6 Ps, and excuse my language here, but it was piss poor preparation equals piss poor performance. And it's really true for interviews too. If you don't do your preparation, you're going to really struggle to stand out from the crowd and stay ahead of the competition. So with that in mind, what can you really do to help you prepare? So first of all, you've really got to do your research. And when I mean research, I'm not just talking about reading the JD, which is the second point here, but it's looking into things like the company annual reports. So when you go into a company's annual report, you can either do a search and find and look for things like corporate strategy. There might even be like a marketing, sometimes a comm strategy, but rarely not that. There'll be other things around human resources and talent acquisition, learning and development. So whether you're externally focused or internally focused, or maybe your brief sort of has a broad scope across both, there's absolutely tons within an annual report that you can pick out, and then you can use that, one, to link your experience back to it, but also two, look at what a company wants to do and has been doing in terms of their strategy, and how can you use your sort of past communications experience and your skills to match that. So, for example, in the people and the talent sort of section of the annual report and the strategy, it might be talking around, kind of where they want to hire, or, kind of whether they want to develop sort of some of their executives and senior executive level staff members into managers of the future. So what can you do from a communications point of view to help support the business to achieve those goals? It's those things which will put you sort of one step ahead of everyone else, and really put you in a strong position to be able to capitalize on that. Second is around the company news. I mean, to be honest, I'd expect that everybody would be doing this, but sort of check out the company news pages and their insights. Also don't just look at kind of what they've got from a press release perspective, but kind of look at their podcast, look at their videos. Quite often, for any of you guys within internal communications, if you look at their careers site, you'll often find sort of stories they've got from sort of within inside the business. There'll be a lot around their culture. If they've got like some DE&I initiatives going on too, you should find lots and lots of information on a company's website or their careers website that again you can use as part of your preparation. Third point here around media mentions. So clearly most companies are going to want to portray everything in a very positive light on their website. But of course, we know that that's not necessarily always the case. And, most companies will be dealing with, some sort of minor or large crises at any one point. So, just have a look at, sort of their mentions in the media, search the company name on Google, search the company name on LinkedIn as well. And then you'll just get a feel from all the articles and the posts on what people are looking at and what they're saying about the company. And then you can use that as part of your prep too. LinkedIn profiles, again, make sure that you've looked up the team. Certainly look up the people that you're interviewing with. Most people are relatively active on LinkedIn nowadays, and either they'll be posting themselves or they'll be liking comments and liking posts from other people. And you'll get a feel from that as to, one, what makes them tick and what sort of person they are. But two, also, you can start to take some notes and perhaps, you can form some of your questions during the interview on what you've seen about their presence on LinkedIn. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. You can turn the notifications on or off in your LinkedIn settings, which will notify someone if you've looked at their profile. I don't bother turning mine off, but I mean, I look at so many profiles all the time as part of my job that, I don't really see or find the need to hide it. But it's completely up to you whether you want to be open or not. But no one is going to mind if they're interviewing you and you look at their LinkedIn profile. In fact, to be honest, most hiring managers would be a bit concerned if you hadn't looked at their LinkedIn profile. So don't worry about that too. And then I've just put a final bullet point, sort of just on the change and crisis piece. I'm aware that I mentioned the crisis bit like a minute ago, but I think, where we are at the moment from a macroeconomic point of view, from a talent market point of view, there aren't many sectors that are flying at the moment. So, the vast majority of businesses are currently going to be going through some sort of change. Maybe maybe there will be some crisis. So, you really need to, you really need to be all over that as much as possible. If you've got any, sort of personal connections within a company as well, I haven't put it on here, but actually that would be another sort of good thing for you to do, because, they can always give you some insider information as to, sort of how the communications team works there, or, sort of what are some of their challenges, so that you can go in really well prepared. Then on to sort of reading the JD. I guess this is a really simple one, but it's still a really important one. JDs only tell you so much, but you still need to go through it and really pull out what are the key responsibilities and the experience that they're looking for in the role, and then you need to make notes against those with examples where you have matched them in your career. So, some really common ones that crop up all the time. Stakeholder management, both on an external front and an internal front. So have some examples written down of, where you've worked with senior leaders, where you worked with Exco, what comms campaigns did you do for them? How did you counsel them through that? Really good examples are, perhaps there's a comms campaign that your C-suite leader didn't think was a very good idea, but you knew that it would work and you could back that up. If you have examples of those where you've been able to counsel and convince them that it's been a good idea and something good to do, and off the back of that it's worked out really well, that is music to any hiring manager's ear. It demonstrates that you're able to manage some tricky stakeholders, be able to convince them, and deliver with some results on top. No one can ask any more than that. I think, also kind of when it comes to like experience required, I think pay really key attention to that. So for example, on an external communications front, what sort of external comms are they looking to do? Is it very reactive? Is it proactive? Is it a mix of both? And then you need to make sure that you have the right sort of examples from your experience lined up for that. And on the internal communications front, how much of it is like sort of day-to-day, like sort of business partnering versus, quite sort of technical change programs. Are there particular types of change programs they're looking for? So whether it's people change or it's IT change, strategy change, you name it. You just need to be really all over the detail there with what they're looking for. And then therefore, when you get asked about examples, because there are loads of times when a hiring manager, let's say on the internal front, in the JD they've written they want experience of strategic change communications, right? So basically supporting the strategy team. The amount of times in an interview when an interviewer won't say, can you give me an example of a time where you've produced a, change communication strategy looking after the strategy team? A lot of it will be, can you give me an example of a time when you produced a change communications campaign? So you need to remember from the JD what type of communications campaigns they're looking for. So again, that's why it's really important to make sure that you've done that. And thirdly, practice your answers. So there's a really common recruitment acronym which kind of just gets drilled into you in like every single recruitment agency going, kind of when you first join as a rookie consultant. When it comes to interview prep and practice, STAR answers come up all the time: situation, task, action, and result. Right. Use this as the basis of how you form your answers. And it really is as simple as the acronym. So the situation, for example, so the situation was, kind of company was about to be bought out. Kind of the task we had to do was, kind of we had to prepare the employee communications for that deal. Then the action was, kind of we did X, Y, and Z. And then off the result of that, what did you achieve? Kind of what were your results sort of from the employees? It's those sorts of answers which you just need to get used to. Write a few of your examples down using that acronym and then fitting sort of those examples into that. It will take a little bit of time and practice to get used to it. But if you do that, you'll be in a really good position to be able to interview well. Now, moving on to the interview itself. So kind of this is before the interview starts. You'll see we've got some sticky notes on the left-hand side. If anybody still uses sticky notes, I know I still do have them, and a notepad as well. I think this is probably my absolute number one tip for anyone interviewing at any level. Make notes beforehand, of course, but you can take those notes to interview. And I'm not saying sit in the interview and literally read from the page like this, because that's not the right thing to do. But when you're in an interview and you're under a little bit of pressure and there's a little bit of stress, because 99.9% of people do get a little bit nervous in interview situations, even when they say they don't, they do. Write down some of those key campaigns. Write down those key stats, those numbers, those percentages, because when the pressure's on, those are the things that go from the memory first. So you really do have to have those things written down so that you don't forget them. Also, on the flip side of this, during the interview, you can take notes. No one is going to say to you, "What are you doing?" if you're sat there just taking the odd note whilst you're interviewing. One, it shows you're engaged. Two, stuff that you won't forget, because how many interviews have you had where you think they've gone really well, and 5 minutes after the interview, you're trying to remember, oh, what was that point they talked about? Or, what was the name of that campaign? Or, what were those stats they told me? Because those things go as well. So, use a notepad and take notes. And then, all being well, and you get through the first round, you can then refer back to those notes in future interviews. And when you're meeting, let's say Bob at second stage, and you can say, Bob, and when I was speaking to Sarah at first stage, she told me about this, and this. Can you tell me a bit more about it? So, and again, kind of to Bob, people think, oh, great. Kind of they've actually, kind of really listened during the first interview. They're really engaged. They've thought about, the value that they can bring to the business. And again, it just puts you in a much better position. So, and the thing with the sticky notes, that's really for virtual interviews on Teams, because you can see here, I've got my microphone set up and I've got my webcam. I don't have them right now, but I could have lots of sticky notes here with notes. You wouldn't see that I've got lots of sticky notes with notes on them. So it's the same thing for you when you're interviewing. Put those sort of key stats and those key figures, etc. Stick them onto sticky notes, and then you can stick them on your laptop. And then you can be talking away and you can give your answer, and then you've got a stat to remember. And whilst I'm looking at the camera, I can sort of look at the side of my eye and I can still see whatever stat or whatever number that I need to access. So do that. Obviously don't tell the interviewer that you've got lots of sticky notes on your screen. They might think you're cheating a little bit, but you're not. But yeah, just kind of keep it to yourself. But that would be a real sort of top tip from me too. So yeah, if you've got sticky notes and they're getting a bit dusty in your drawers, kind of take them out, and give them a dust off, because I think you'll find it really helpful. So first impressions, it's a real cliche, isn't it? Sort of people sort of always make a judgment on someone else when you meet them within the first, sort of 10 to 15 seconds. I guess the same is true to some extent with interviews. You could have a slightly rough or not a brilliant, sort of first impression and still rescue it, but it's going to be uphill from there if the first impression isn't really along the right lines. Sort of really simple things, particularly if you're meeting face to face, lots of eye contact, kind of shake their hands, ask them how they are, just real small talk pleasantries. I'd like to think everyone on this, sort of watching this stream does that, but again, I've sort of seen it all in the 7 and a bit years that I've been doing this job. So just make sure you're doing that. And then I've kind of put under here, you'll see there's a little quote. Tell me about yourself. I reckon tell me about yourself must be the first question that the vast majority of hiring managers ask candidates when they first meet them. And a lot of people don't know how to answer it, or they don't know how to answer it well. I think of this a bit like your elevator pitch. I know that, sales doesn't necessarily come that easy to communications people, naturally very sort of, kind of naturally very creative, like to talk a lot. But, here is where you want to be nice and concise, and you want to get, kind of, a really nice introduction across quickly, sort of covering what you need to cover, but whatever you do, don't rabbit on. So I've put some bullet points here which should be helpful for you. So try and keep it at 60 seconds max. Again, this is something that you can practice, sort of beforehand, and just really simple. Say something like, "Hi, I'm Max. I've got 7.5 years of in-house communications recruitment experience, and I've worked for leading brands such as EMR and LHH, and now I've set up my own firm, Comsearch and Selection. I absolutely love my job recruiting in-house communications people because I get to speak to really interesting people every day, and then also, seeing candidates sort of grow and thrive into roles makes me really happy. And the reason I'm sitting here today is because I was really interested in the role, and I'd love to, sort of get to know more about you and your team and go from there." And ask them a question at the end as well. I think when an interviewer asks you a question like, "Tell me about yourself," there's nothing wrong with you at the end, saying, "Look, kind of how did you get into, sort of your position here?" Sort of, and just get a little bit of, kind of their background, so you get to learn a bit more about them too. And then you end up having a much nicer conversation, and you'll find that the interview will become, much more conversation led, rather than a bit of a disastrous, "Tell me about yourself," where it hasn't gone very well, or you're sat there and you're, sort of 10 minutes into the interview, and you've gone through your career, kind of your family life, your home, kind of where you've been on holiday. That's too long. You need to keep it short, sharp, and snappy. And here I've put a slide, on tell them about the research you've done. So all the prep I was talking about around, looking at annual reports, looking at the company news site, kind of Googling their name, finding out as much about the role in the company as you can. There's no point doing that if you then don't feed that into the interview and into your answers and the questions. So at first stage, you're unlikely to get asked, or certainly one of the first few questions, you're unlikely to get asked, what would you do in the role, or what would you bring to our company? It's unlikely that you'll get asked that. But from your research, you will be able to, just sort of drip some of that in, so that, when you're getting asked a question around your campaign experience, for example, you can have, sort of some notes on some of their recent campaigns, and you can ask them, how's that campaign gone down with your stakeholders? How successful has that campaign been? When you're getting asked around, kind of what was the last strategy that you put in place, flip that on them and ask them about their strategy. You want to show that you've done, that you've done your research. And also, like, another really good thing with asking them something back, yes, it shows that engagement. Yes, it shows them that you've done your research, but it will also buy you time. And by time, I don't mean it's going to make the interview bang on forever, but it will give you thinking time, and thinking time for a candidate in an interview is absolutely invaluable. Having that thinking time to be able to sit back, whilst they're answering your question to them and they're talking at you, you can have a review in your head of the answers you've given previously. You know, when you're under pressure and you're a little bit stressed, you know, answers are never going to be perfect. So there might have been something really important which you'll suddenly think of and think, I should have mentioned that earlier. Let's make sure that I include that in another response or as part of my question later in the interview. So, yeah, use that as an opportunity to, one, show you've done your research, but flip it back on them to buy you that time. And those questions, you know, kind of, you don't need to overthink them. It can literally just be asking them the question that they've asked you back. And then in terms of going the extra mile and presenting your ideas, so this is really, really, really important. And this is probably the number one thing that will make you stand out from everyone else. Everyone at first stage interview goes in prepared to talk through their experience, their background, their skill set. Some will have gone through the JD and they will have lined up some of their experience to that, you know, so that they have some really relevant examples to be able to share. Barely any candidates at first stage go in armed with some ideas of what they would do if they got the role and how they could enhance and improve that company's communications. So this is where your research comes in. But you know, let's look on the external communication side of things. For example, you know, look at their press releases. You know, look how they landed. You know, what sort of coverage did they get off the back of it? It's not too difficult to be able to do that yourself. You know, particularly for those of you that also have access to a Meltwater or a Cision, you can probably do a search on there as well for the company that you're interviewing with to see what sort of coverage they're getting, and then just have a think of you know, sort of how could you enhance that, you know, kind of how could you grow that, and on the internal, you know, kind of comms front again, you know, kind of look at what they're putting out around their culture, or you know, whether you've got any information on some of their change programs and how they go down, or you know, you might have looked through the annual report, and you know, like if you start seeing lots and lots of mentions of, you know, kind of matrix organization, you know, challenges, you know, have a look at an annual report and search for the word challenges or challenge. It will give you a really good understanding of, you know, some of the areas of business, you know, is struggling with, or you know, kind of, this is very common for, you know, kind of large organizations, really, because, you know, really just because they are so large and they're so matrixed, and you know, they've got, you know, sort of so many different service lines and business lines, and they've got employees in different countries, you know, some based in the office, some remote, some in the field. You know, it can be a real challenge for these businesses to do lots of their things well. So if you can have some ideas from an internal communications point of view, you know, what you can do from a campaign perspective or a strategy perspective to be able to you know, start to tackle some of those and drop those in to your answers, that is going to make you stand out from everyone. And by dropping them into your answers, a bit like with the previous slide, you know, here, sort of when we were talking about, you know, sort of feeding in sort of some of your, you know, sort of research, and then kind of flipping them back to them with a question. You can do exactly the same with your ideas. You know, you can be giving an answer to their question around your experience, and then at the end of it, rather than asking them a question, you can then, you say, look, I noticed that, kind of your annual report made note of these challenges, or I've seen, kind of these media mentions, or, sort of this campaign, perhaps, kind of it landed okay, but, here's what I would do to help make that better for you. That will demonstrate, that you have thought about, how you could enhance their communications. And yeah, that will go down so well. So, really feed that in. I've put a note here, which I think is actually really important, just the second bullet point. Keep those supportive. What you don't want to do is you don't want to end up in a situation whereby, you're absolutely trashing their world. So you have to be careful with that, in that, you don't want to say, oh, look, I thought that campaign was rubbish. You do need to be polite. But so be supportive, be constructive. Don't trash their world. Also, you'll get a feel as well from the interviewer. A lot of this will come down to the individual, sort of personality, as to, I guess, how open you can be in terms of your feedback. And by the way, there are some unbelievably good communications teams led by some unbelievably good comms directors, head of comms, CCOs, you name it. There is not a single communications team where there might be something that you could, look at from a slightly different angle, or you could help them to improve. It might not necessarily even be anything within your own personal experience, but, it could be around, trends. Clearly, obviously, the big thing at the moment is around AI and the impact that's going to have on communications. Maybe you've started using, some really cool AI software to help you with communications, whether that's, sort of written stuff, graphics, infographics, you name it. That will, you can always find something. If you're in financial services, PR, or internal communications, what is the impact of the Nigel Farage, NatWest, Coots situation? Clearly that's not having ramifications across, a lot of the consumer financial services world. There's new legislation looking at being brought in, regulators, etc. So, there are always things that a communications team needs to be thinking about, needs to be preparing for. And, maybe it will take a slight tweak in strategy, or it might take a new campaign. Are our risk team really up to speed with exactly what their role is and what the implication is for the business, for example? And do we need to, or during the interview, maybe you want to bring that up and start, brainstorming some ideas of what you could do, right, to help them mitigate any risk there. It's that sort of thing I'm talking about when you can't necessarily find examples from your own experience, but thinking ahead, keeping on top of those latest trends, really important. What key skills do hiring managers want? I guess there's probably 4 things. And by the way, these things cover both external and internal. And this was quite a hard one to be able to get down to just 4. But I think these are 4 things that come up all the time, whether it's in a JD or whether it's in interview feedback. Number 1, stakeholder management. Every single job description requires it. Some people are better at it than others. If you're good at it, you should have lots of examples to be able to give, and you should be fine. If you're not good at it, I think this is where you know, invest in some training, maybe look at a coach, because it's really, really important, particularly as you move up the ladder. So here I'm talking about, sort of managers or, senior managers, who might be aspiring to be a head of, or, like a head of who wants to become a director, or a director that wants to step up to the C-suite. Being able to provide that strategic, yes, but also that tactical counsel from a communications perspective, whether it's a reputational thing on a PR front, or, kind of whether it's an engagement thing internally on the internal communications front, you absolutely have to be able to do it. And even if you're, slightly more introverted, which I know particularly on the internal communication side of things, kind of there are plenty of introverted internal communicators who are absolutely brilliant at their core job, but find the stakeholder management bit quite hard. So get the training, or invest in a coach to help you do this, because it's really important. If you're an aspiring, sort of head of, director, or C-suite, if you haven't built those relationships and you're not able to manage your stakeholders, no matter how good your technical skills with the job may be, you are very, very unlikely to get that job if you go for it. So yeah, look, it's really important. I can advise. I've got some good comms coach contacts that, I'm more than happy to refer anyone to, for that stakeholder management piece. Because yeah, look, I can advise a bit, but it's not within my core wheelhouse. But kind of let me know if you need any help with that. Second, I put journalistic instinct, and again, this is both external and internal. Having that nose for a story is so important. People-focused stories. It's been a trend over the last few years, but really now it's the stuff that lands in terms of engagement, both externally and internal. I think you really need to be able to, spot those stories that will engage people. And I think, probably a really good example here, and what I mean by this on an internal front, is if you're not getting out and spending time with the operational side of your business, whether it's B2B or B2C, you basically need to get in front of the, sort of sales guys, the engineers, the consultants, you name it. You need to get out and about with them, and you need to find those stories which are going to really interest other colleagues, and that's what you base your internal communications around. And certainly your campaigns, your engagement for that sort of stuff, I promise you, will go absolutely through the roof. And it's same with the guys on the external front. So, having that nose for a story, not being afraid to get to know people, not being afraid to ask questions, do it. And then third, the situational judgment. This is really being able to understand the nuance of a situation. It can be difficult, particularly, for those earlier in their career, or, maybe at manager level. Certainly something, I struggled with for a little bit, when I first got a corporate job, if you like, was, saying no and being able to push back on people and obviously this is when you need to, kind of, this is not just pushing back for the sake of it, but, knowing when to push back, knowing tone, nuance. We live in a 24-hour media cycle, news cycle. It's the same internal as it is external. Stuff is changing all the time. You might write, you might write a press release, or you might write an internal email like now at 20 to 6 our time in the UK. That's to be sent out tomorrow morning. Something happens overnight, either externally or internally. You might wake up in the morning and think, oh, actually, we need to tweak that, or we need to can it. So having examples of where you've used your situational judgment as part of your experience goes down really well. And then fourthly, great writing. So I guess this is a bit controversial in that AI is going to get so good that you'll be able to feed in, your brand guidelines, your company's tone of voice, how you write, and it will be able to, pump out some pretty good copy. Having said that, it's nowhere near that yet. It still does a pretty good job. It's fine for a first draft. But, you still need that ability to write well, but definitely to edit well, and be able to take anything that, even if ChatGPT, kind of comes up with a first draft, that, you can then take that and turn that into something that's, kind of genuinely, really well received, and also doesn't read like it's AI. I don't know how many of you, like have had a look at any of these writing tools. Like I can spot it a mile off. The amount of sales emails that I get. I know, kind of sales is different from comms, but at its heart, kind of the amount of sales emails I get where, the writing, I can just tell it's a ChatGPT formulated auto reply that isn't that well personalized and sounds like a robot's written it. So you really do need to be able to still be able to write well and edit well. Kind of don't give that up. Kind of whatever you do, it's still really important. And also, the amount of interviews, even at a relatively senior level, that still include some sort of writing or written task, or so you do still need to be able to write. So, don't just kind of completely, sort of lose that ability, because that's generally really important. Cool. And now, it's time for Q&A. If you want to start putting any questions you might have in the comments, and then I should be able to start picking them up. So, fire away, and I'll get into them. So we have our first question. I won't say your surname, don't worry. From Rebecca. What advice do you have for getting past the initial internal recruiter interview? Yeah, really good question. I think this is where it really comes down to the JG and the job description, and making sure that you've gone through that with a bit of a fine-tooth comb. Very rarely, an internal recruiter might be really hot and might know everything there is to know about comms, but most of the time they don't. So, and also a little thing for people if they didn't know, a lot of internal recruiters, some of them actually work for the company, as in kind of they're employed by the company you're interviewing with. Some of them are what we call an RPO in the business. So there'll be like an Alexander Man Solutions, for example, who will effectively, kind of sit on site. So kind of they'll have a contract with the end employer, but the actual recruiter won't be employed by the end employer. So, so with that in mind, I think, it really comes down to the JD, and making sure that you effectively have an answer for every bullet point on the JD, because that's what they'll be marking you against, really. Yeah, and that's all I can really say on that. I think, if it comes down to, if they start asking around salary expectations, I mean, I know it obviously differs a little bit in certain parts of the US compared to other parts, and certainly in the UK where you can, sort of have a conversation around that. I think certainly on the salary bit, kind of just be honest. I think, you don't want to undersell yourself. And at the same point, I mean, I know there are a lot of people, who are looking for work at the moment and do need a new role. But yeah, stick to your value. And, if something is, in that conversation with the internal recruiter, if something is way too low, don't be afraid to call it. And thanks so much for your question, Rebecca. So next question from Laura. So do you have any differing tips for internal interviews? Oh, good question. I guess I think a lot of this depends on who you're interviewing with internally, and how well you know them. I think it's probably quite difficult actually to interview with someone, who you know really well, because I think it can almost, the conversation could almost end up a little bit matey. So I think if you can, or if you have any influence, I think, actually, one, if possible, try and interview internally with, someone who doesn't know you that well, if you can influence it at all, by the way, but, someone who you don't know that well. So therefore, you can keep that interview structure almost quite similar to how you would externally. But of course, you don't need to go quite so heavy on the, kind of dropping your research in around the company, because, you really should know that. I think probably what would actually go down really well internally, like almost in your prep, try and put yourselves in the shoes of, someone externally, and use some examples, I guess, from other companies that you know about, or your competitors. And, I think kind of when it comes to, sort of dropping in ideas of, what you would do in the role if you got it, using some of that sort of competitor knowledge and going, look, I've seen that X company, sort of has been doing this really well, kind of this is landing really well, why don't we do some of this here? Like I've had a quick look around and, it's going to cost X amount, or need these sorts of resources. I think, try and do that. I do sympathise because I do think it's quite a tough one. And I think also, if you can internally, try and get a steer for, what they're looking for from the candidate prior to the interview, so that you can sell some of your experience into that. Because where you do have an advantage is you'll know the information that's not written on the JD. So, everyone has a pretty generic job description, or, like a job advert, but you'll have extra intel that the external candidates won't. So just try and use your contacts internally, really. Next question. And thanks, Laura, for your question. So next question is from someone anonymous. Ooh. Do I have any advice, please, on good questions to ask the interview panel to show yourself in a good light? To show yourself in a good light. On good questions to ask the interview panel to show yourself in a good light. I think to show yourself in a good light. God, that's difficult, isn't it? I think probably a lot of it to an interview panel comes down to questions where, again, you've shown that you've done your research on the company, and that you ask the interview panel questions back to them around that. So, I think a lot of that, sort of get that from the annual report, because on that interview panel, I'm assuming here, but most interview panels will tend to have people from different departments. So if you've done enough, research off the annual report, there should be, there should be some stuff there that you can ask either to the whole panel or to people on the panel who might not necessarily be within the communications or marketing team. So, kind of maybe their strategy or their operations. Finance actually is a really good one to prepare for. Kind of look at their, sort of results and look at what their finance strategy is, and ask them about that and what they're looking from the communications function to help them, sort of with that. That's what I do. So thanks to the anonymous person for that. And then next question from, I'm going to get your pronunciation wrong, but I'll give it a go. Oishani, I think. Hopefully that's right. How does one get noticed by recruiters, hiring managers, especially when the profile is a really good match? How does one get noticed by recruiters, hiring managers when the profile is a really good match? You'd like to think it would be getting noticed if it was a really good match. I guess the inference with your question is your profile is a really good match, but you're not getting noticed by recruiters or hiring managers. Look, it's a tough one. I think that that's probably it's a symptom of the environment we're in at the moment. If you look at the number of people applying to roles on LinkedIn, most comms roles are getting, sort of hundreds and hundreds of applications. Someone is sifting through that. Companies might have, like an AI bot sort of plugged into their ATS. An ATS is an applicant tracking system, if you don't know what that is. Even my ATS, comes with an AI bot thing, which I can use if I wanted to, but I don't. What they look at is a lot of that is just around sort of keyword searches and skills searches. So on your CV and your profile, make sure that you have the keywords and skills that are on a job description in your CV and on your profile, and you're more likely to get bumped up. So that will help. You can have, on your CV, as long as you've genuinely got the experience and the skills, there are some fairly generic communications ones which you can put on there, literally just in a section called, skills, and stick it after your experience, by the way, because no one reads it at the top. And you can have in there, really common phrases like, sort of PR, public relations, change communications, internal communications, stakeholder management, all of that key stuff that comes up time and time again. Just put that in your resume, make sure it's in a skills section. That will help. Hopefully that answers your questions. All right, so I think Oishani was the last question. Has anyone else got anything to add? We've got a couple of minutes left on the stream. So if anyone's got any burning questions, please pop them in. And we have another question here from Mike. So thanks, Mike, for your question. And Mike's asked, what is the one killer question that you would ask a hiring manager? One killer question. It's interesting. What would I ask? I think the vast majority of hiring managers, when they're hiring, whether they'll admit this to a candidate or not, most hiring managers hire someone because, yes, they want their team to be successful, but also, they want to make their lives a little bit easier. So quite often, kind of they will be, they'll be spinning and juggling so many plates that they need someone in to help sort of take some of that sort of weight and slack off. I would definitely say something along the lines of, what would success look like from this person for you? So, I think you want to show that you've got, kind of that real sort of willingness to come in, and do a really good job, and really help, sort of push their team forward. But at the same time, you almost want them to get them thinking, okay, I can also then, sort of set them some really ambitious targets and objectives, and, they'll make their, and you'll make their life a little bit easier too. So yeah, I'd probably ask them something around that. Thank you, Laura. That's a very nice message. Thank you. Yeah. And thank you, Cindy. Kind of really glad you liked it. Kind of pleasure. I'll move on to my final slide here as well. Sort of please do, sort of pop us a sort of connection request on LinkedIn. You can follow the company page, which is at Comsection Selection. If I'm not connected with you already personally, if you just search for Max Forsyth, you'll find me. Kind of please do, kind of feel free just to drop me a connection request on LinkedIn. Kind of very happy to answer any more questions that you've got privately too. Feel free to check out our website, which is comsearch.com. And on there, you can access, sort of latest vacancies we're working on. If you've got any vacancies in your team as well that you need support with, you can upload any vacancies there too. We're on Instagram as well. And we're also on Twitter, but I forgot to put that on here. Thirdly, kind of for any more sort of generic inquiries too, feel free to email us at hello@comsearch.com. And if anyone wants it as well, I've put together a salary guide for the UK and the US, which covers roles from manager right up to C-suite. So again, kind of please just drop me a message on LinkedIn, or drop us an email, or you can fill in the contact form on our website, and I will get that sent out to you. In the meantime, it's nearly kind of 6 p.m. here in the UK, and 1 p.m. in the States. So stateside, I'm guessing you guys are all sort of on your lunch break, and for us in the UK, it's time to relax. So kind of thank you very much for joining. And we will be doing more of these LinkedIn lives over the next coming months, because it's been really fun. And also look out, we're going to be starting a podcast soon too. But kind of more details about that coming up soon. Have fun. Cheers.